Welcome everyone to this video where we're going to be chatting about digital multimeters. I've got the one here that we're going to be using in the course, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at it. So digital multimeters are arguably one of the most important tools in both an electrical engineer and hardware hacker's toolkit. And the reason for that is they are kind of like a Swiss Army knife. They're called a multimeter because they actually perform the function of what used to be multiple meters. So in order to measure voltage in the past, we used to use what was called a voltmeter. And to measure current or amps, we used what was called an ammeter. And then to measure resistance or ohms, we would use what's called an ohm meter. So these digital multimeters are able to combine all of those measurements plus a couple other functions that we're going to chat about in this video. So this meter that we're using in this course, I've selected because it is relatively inexpensive while still being quite accurate and having some great features to it. And it has all the features that we're going to need for this course. The one thing that it doesn't have, which you will start to see on more expensive meters, is what's called either auto ranging or auto scaling. So what that means in that we don't have this auto ranging or auto scaling is that we actually have to pick the scale that we want to measure on. So I'm just going to pick this up to show an example of it. All right, so if we take a look, for example, here, we can see how we can make the ammeter measurements. So this A symbol stands for the ammeter, and then we already know that this symbol here is for direct current. And if we want to make a measurement, for example, that is in the 0 to 2000 microamp range, then we can use this one. And then if we're going above that 2000 microamps and we're at this 20 milliamps or below, so between this 2000 microamps and 20 milliamps, we would use this measurement, and then so on all the way up to the 10 amps. So same thing down here, we have the ohm symbol. So this is where we can use it in the ohm meter mode to measure resistance. And we can measure the resistance all the way from 1 ohm up to 200 ohms here, from 200 ohms to 2 kilo ohms, and then all the way up to the 200 mega ohms. Okay, so for voltage, we are up here, and this is the symbol for volts DC. Again, same idea with those ranges. And then finally, I'll just show you here this symbol and these two measurements. So these are for measuring the volts in alternating current, and we're not going to be touching those in this lesson, so no need to use it. So to make measurements with our multimeter, we are of course going to need probes, and these are what are called the probes, or sometimes people call them leads. And the way that these work is we're able to press these metal leads onto the components or wherever doing our testing, and we can make a measurement. And then of course the other end of them, so these ends actually plug into our meter. The first one that plugs in, and you guys can do this if you're following along, is the black one goes into this one, which is labeled COM, and that COM stands for common ground. So this is where the ground goes, and of course our black is going to be that. So I'll just plug it in right now. All right. And now you will see that we do have two areas where we can plug in the red one. And if we look at the first one, it says here, volts, ohms, milliamps, and then this squiggly line, which is for our function generator, which is another feature that this multimeter has. And that's where we're going to be using it for this course. However, just so you're aware of why we then have one here that says it's for measuring 10 amp max. The reason for that is we see here it says fused. So internally on this multimeter, there is what is called a fuse. And what the fuse does is it protects the internal circuitry from if we measure a current or something that's going to put a current too high through the internal circuitry, and it would damage that. Instead, we have the fuse in line. And when that current that's too high goes through the fuse, it will burn out the fuse and stop the current from flowing. And the fuses are really cheap. It's easy to replace them, so we don't actually break our internal circuit or burn it out. Now, the fuse for this one is fused to allow the milliamps. So we can see here, if you take a look closely, this one is fused at 500 volts max or 500 milliamps. So for everything in this course, that's going to be perfectly fine for us. However, if you were, doing this 10 amp current reading here on the ammeter section, you would need to unplug from here and plug into this one. And then we get access to that bigger fuse that's going to allow that measurement. Again, we're not going to be working with anything that high in this course, so we don't need to do that. We can just plug it into this one. I'm going to do that right now. Plug the red one. All right, and then you can just leave it in these two for the rest of the course. That's all we'll need. Two other features that I want to show on the front of this. So we do have a light here. Now if I just turn it on here, and then if we push this, then we get a light that lights up. The other thing that we have is this button, which is a hold. So if you're taking a measurement and you just want to not have to write that down or remember it for a second, if you push this hold button, then instead of measuring anymore, it's just going to lock what's on the screen, so you have that saved. Last thing I'll show is on the back, it actually does open up. So internally of this, there's a 9-volt battery, and that's what used to power this. If it does die or it stops working, that's where you replace this. And also the fuses are internal in here. So if you ever blow out a fuse, you can replace it from in here. All right, finally, one last thing. So you might hear the digital multimeter referred to as DMM, that abbreviation for it. And I might say that a few times as well because it's pretty common to hear that. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. That wraps up this video, and I'll see you over the next one.